in the United Kingdom. It's also known as the Kahal Kadosh Ad Hashemayim. The synagogue is the Holy Congregation Gate of Heaven. It's an Orthodox Jewish congregation synagogue located off Bevis Marks Old Gate in the city of London. Very famous synagogue in the United Kingdom. It's affiliated right, let's just say, in of itself, and very, very synagogue. Let's explore a little bit within regards to the synagogue. We are an online encyclopedia exploring about the great rabbis of the Spanish rabbis, Oriental rabbis. So we will mention a bit about the famous rabbis also. So it's actually the building itself, which stations Bevis Marks Synagogue, was designated in 1950 as a listed building. I think it's on the Henegate Lane in London. It was built in the year 1701, grade 1 listed building, and is considered the oldest synagogue in the United Kingdom. And it's been in continuous use. It's the only synagogue building in Europe that has been, let's say, continuously held regular services for more than 320 years, which is amazing. Now, the construction, the origins of the community date back from an influx of, let's say, to London of crypto Jews. You could say Moranos, most of them were, from Spain and Portugal, mostly via a growing Sephardic Jewish community in Amsterdam. Remember, we did a special edition of the history of the Sephardi community in Amsterdam, the Netherlands, quite recently. And this was in the earlier part of the 17th century. These Jews began practicing their religion openly again once it became possible to do so through Jewish resettlement in England under the rule of Oliver Cromwell, which we mentioned about in a video of Menashe ben Israel, which we did about a year ago, if you look back at the playlist of the channel. Okay, what's interesting, so we stated that the services, it was a small synagogue originally in a Church Lane. It began in the year 1657, and the congregation also secured land for its own cemetery in the area of Mile End, also known as the Bellow Cemetery. Come with the year 1663, I think there was a diarist, someone that wrote a diary of the name Samuel Pepys. He came in the festival of Simchat Torah at the culmination of Sukkot in 1663, recorded his impressions of the service on that specific year. Come with 1698, famous Rabbi Nieto would take, let's say, the spiritual charge, the premiership of the congregation of the Spanish and Portuguese, the Jewish community of the Sephardim. He became the leader there, or say chief rabbi. Remember, there was Rabbi Yaakov Sosportas and other rabbis, I think, during that specific era also, that would be in charge to some capacity. Now, there was a considerable influx of Jewish people, made it necessary to obtain more commodious quarters, let's just say. Accordingly, a committee was appointed consisting of various people, including someone named Antonio Gomez Serra, Manasseh Mendez, Manuel Nunes Miranda, Andrea Lopez, and I hope I pronounced this person's name correctly, Pontalio Rodriguez. It investigated matters, let's say, for a year. And I think come February 1699, they would sign a contract with someone named Joseph or Joseph Avis for this, because on, let's say, righteous grounds, that he didn't want to take a profit from the building, which is because it was a house of worship of Hashem in of itself. Also unsustained is the story that apparently there was a timber was donated by the Princess Anne for the roof of the synagogue, which is another very interesting tidbit to know about it. Then I think June 1699, the committee leased from Sir Thomas and specific lady also, I think part of the building, if I'm not mistaken. Come with the year 1747, there was a man named Benjamin Mendez da Costa. He bought the lease of the ground on which the building stood and presented it to the congregation, vesting, let's say, deeds in the names of a committee consisting of various people, including Gabriel Lopez de Brito, David Aboab Osorio, Moses Gomez Serra, David Franco, Joseph Jeshurin Rodriguez, and Moses Mendez da Costa. Now, the community at this stage in time would see a significant influx of more crypto Jews from Portugal fleeing the Inquisition during the 17th and 18th centuries. Marriage and Brit Milah, circumcision, record couples, let's say, as Vindos de Portugal, or more rarely Vindos de España, for the purpose of reconsecrating their, let's just say, vows. Now they were free to practice Judaism at this stage in time, openly or undertaking Brit Milah as adults. Alongside migration from Sephardi centres such as Amsterdam and Livorno, there was a steady influx of refugees from Portugal up until around the year 1735, this was, after which it would start diminishing, with some of the last recorded arrivals from Portugal as late as the year 1790. Now, records would show arrivals escaping principally from major cities such as Lisbon and Porto, and the remote borderland region from Spain, such as Calordio de Beiro, Guarda, Braganza, and Belmonte. And this, as a result of the migration, it's actually interesting. The sermon at Bevis Marks Synagogue will take place at that point in time. In Portuguese, it will start taking place, and that will be the language of the sermon until as late as the year 1833. Come on, 1833, they would then switch to English that stage in time. So that's a bit of language history. Now, the influence for Sephardi Jews, let's just say, the Bevis Marks was the religious center of Anglo-Jewish world for more than a century, and it would actually go on to serve, let's say, as a clearinghouse for congregational and individual Jewish problems all over the world. These include the appeal of Jews in Jamaica for reduction in taxation, for example, in the year 1736, the internecine quarrel among Jews in Barbados, which is reported over, just reading from the article in Wikipedia in 1753, and the aiding of 7-year-old Moses de Paz, who escaped from Gibraltar in the year 1777 to avoid a forced conversion. At that stage in time, there was going to be to Christianity, which was highly chronicled at that stage in time. Now, the congregation came to the aid of the Jewish community in Ireland by donating funds to build a wall around, let's say, the Ballybough cemetery, and providing an agent to oversee works. Let's say the deeds for the cemetery were then lodged at the Bevis Marks Synagogue. So you can see the grandiose amount of important works they did across the United Kingdom, various parts of Europe, and across the world. Though the actions of the leading synagogue member, Moses Montefiore, the synagogue was also involved in 19th century in the Damascus affair. They would help out, and the Mortara affair. Remember, Moses Montefiore was a famous philanthropist in world Jewry at his stage. Two events provoking, those two events, Damascus affair and the Mortara affair, they provoked much international discussion on Jewish human rights and reputation. It was part of the inspiration of someone named Jacob Sassoon's Ohel Rachel Synagogue in Shanghai, which was the largest synagogue in the Far East. Now, among the chief rabbis, let's just say, of Anglo-Sephardic Jewry, the Chachamim, the chief rabbis, let's say, who served at Bevis Marks, we're talking about Bevis Marks here, there was a whole list of chief rabbis who did it with Spanish, Portuguese, the communities as a whole of the congregation. Now we're talking about Bevis Marks. Rabbi David Nieto, Rabbi Daniel Nieto was between 1654 and 1728, or maybe he lived around that age. I don't know if he was the rabbi at that whole point in time. There was a rabbi named Benjamin Araton I don't know if he lived or he was between 1835 to 1879. He was a rabbi there at some stage. Rabbi Avraham Haliva was a rabbi there at some stage. He passed away in 1853. Rabbi Moses Gaster passed away in 1939. He would become a chief rabbi, head rabbi in Bevis Marks Synagogue. He would also be, I believe, a chief rabbi of the Spanish-Portuguese community. Amongst other notable members of the synagogue congregation was author, for example, someone named Miriam Mendes Belisario. There was a famous boxer called David Mendoza, and Isaac Disraeli, who happened to be the father of the British Prime Minister Benjamin Disraeli, was also, I think, a member of the community. Now, their community will go through expansions. At one stage in time, let's just say, so when they were moved East End to London's West End suburbs, members demanded new synagogues to be built in the West End at that stage in time. When the leadership refused this, some members, it's reported over here on Wikipedia, formed a breakaway synagogue in Burton Road, which later became the West London Synagogue. Now, come 1853, a branch synagogue was opened up in Wigmore Street. In 1866, this was moved to the Bryanson Street in Bayswater. Attendance at the Bevis Marks Synagogue declined, I think, at that point in time. And in 1886, a move to sell the site was contemplated. The Bevis Marks Anti-Demolition League was founded under auspices of someone named H. Guadala and A.H. Newman, and the proposed move was abandoned. In 1896, a new synagogue was built at Lordsdale Road in Maida Vale. As successor to the Bryanston Street Synagogue, a second satellite congregation was established at 46th Avenue, Wembley, during the 1960s. So the famous Wembley Spanish-Portuguese synagogue. Now, events in the early 20th century, I think specifically a famous date was April the 10th, 1992. The synagogue was affected by unfortunately, there was an IRA terrorist attack on the Baltic Exchange. The bomb was contained in a large white truck and consisted of a fertilizer device wrapped with a detonation cord made from Semtex. It's reported over here. This was reported or chronicled over. And the chairman of the building's Spanish-Portuguese congregation, Mr. Barry Musicant, he had a donned a hard hat and escorted by police, was one of the first people to enter this specific area of the streets to examine damage that was done to the synagogue. He, with the agreement of the insurance company, put in place a program of repair which lasted 15 weeks, enabling the building to be restored. I think actually happened to be his daughter's wedding shortly after. The following year, the synagogue was also affected by an attack on Bishopsgate. Nearly 200,000 was raised by donations to help renovations to its beauty. Now, also in June 2019, it was awarded 2.7 million by the National Lottery for construction work, covering half of the building's new religious cultural centre. In early 2021, quite recently, £497,000 was received from the government's Culture Recovery Fund to protect its collection of significant objects and the history of the site to illuminate 2021 and 2020 was considerable opposition to planning applications for two nearby skyscrapers, which would cut off natural light to the synagogue, threatening its ongoing use for daily services. The community had said that historic synagogue faces a closure at that point in time, as the loss of light would render services almost impossible. That's what was stated over. Plans to build both tower blocks were ultimately denied by the City of London. In 2023, the Cree Church Conservation Area was approved, which should protect Bevis Marks Grade 2 symbolics without Aldgate from development. Now, features. A prominent feature of the synagogue is a Renaissance-style Torah ark over there, located at the center of the eastern wall, let's just say, of the building, resembling a design of redos of the periods, that place of worship, that period, painted as though it was colored Italian marble and made entirely of oak, I think. The architectural critique, Ian Nairn, in his book Nairn's London, describes synagogue as defined by great luminous room, for example, compassionate light streaming in through big clear glass windows. There's famously seven hanging brass candelabra, symbolizes 7 days a week, naturally, obviously. The largest of which, hanging in the center of the synagogue, represents a Shabbat. The central candelabrum was donated by the community of Amsterdam, the Great Synagogue of Amsterdam. The candles are still lit, let's say today, for weddings, for Jewish festivals. The rest of the year, the synagogue is lit by electric lights, which was added in the year 1928. The Ner Tamid, the sanctuary lamp, is of silver and dates from 1876. Also, they contain benches, this synagogue does, running parallel to the side walls and facing inward, leaving 2 aisles for the procession with Torah scrolls. And I think, in addition, backless benches at the rear of the synagogue, taken from original synagogue at Cree Church Lane, date from 1657 and are still regularly used. A number of seats in the synagogue, let's just say, are roped off as they belong or have belonged to notable people within the community. 2 seats are reserved for the most senior officials of the congregation's publishing arm. Hashaim, a 3rd seat fitted with a footstool, for example, is also with, I think there's also belonged to the seat which was nearest, I think, to the ark of the central role, belonged to Moses Montefiore. So it's also withheld. It's now even occupied. It is now only ever occupied by very senior dignitaries as a particular honor. For example, Prince Charles, I think in 2001, came. Prime Minister Tony Blair came, celebrating the 350th anniversary and of the resettlement of the Jews of Great Britain in 2006. And also the chief rabbi at the time, Jonathan Saxon, Lord Mayor of London, also present. The synagogue retained notable historical records, including community circumcision and marriage records all the way back to 1679. Now, I think in November 1998, the modern synagogue, let's talk about, Peter Lord Levine of Portsoken became the 8th Jewish Lord Mayor of London. He was an Ashkenazi Jew by birth. Lord Levine's first public act was to walk with a retinue from his official residence in Mansion House to Bevis Marks Synagogue for the Shabbat Eve service. And this was repeated by the Lord Mayor Michael Bear on 12th of November 2010. Now, today the Spanish-Portuguese descendant community in London operates, I believe, 3 synagogues: Bevis Marks, Lordsdale Road, and also the smaller synagogue in Wembley over there. The community's sheltered housing let's say, scheme, Harris Court and an old age home called the Edinburgh House are also located in Wembley. There's number of Sephardic synagogues in Britain have associated status. Bevis Marks Synagogue remains a flagship, let's just say, of the synagogue. There's daily services are held, I think, currently or recently, and the synagogue is frequently a venue of weddings and other celebrations. I think it was in August 2015, the rabbi of Bevis Marks was Rabbi Shalom Morris, an American Ashkenazi rabbi of descent. He is a great-grandson of Rabbi Eliezer Silver. Now, King Charles is a patron also of the synagogue, heading a 2019 conservation appeal for funds to turn it into a heritage centre. It's now, as we stated on onset, a grade 1 listed of historic monuments. Also, more in 2018 was landmark time period. 2021, so we talked about the plans of 2021 where there will be issues of block light. It will go so far as the New York Times will report commissioned by the developers claims that the building would have no impact on the amount of natural light. However, many other reasons said there would be a block of light. So we mentioned about the notable people there. The current Spanish Portuguese chief rabbi of the United Kingdom is Rabbi Joseph Dweck, and I recommend everyone to learn more within regards to the famous rabbis associated with the Bevis Marks Synagogue. We've already covered some of the rabbis inside this series over here. Friends, we're a community here. We're learning about famous rabbis of yesteryear. We've already covered 1,000 videos. We're now trying to explore all the different Sephardi synagogues across the world, the famous ones of it. We spoke about Bevis Marks today, and we're also checking out, it's really concentrating on the Ottoman countries, the Sephardic countries, and the North African countries in this series of it. Now, please friends, we are community. We're near 7,000 subscribers, which is absolutely phenomenal. Hi, Shalom. That's it. Hi, everyone, please.